as I indicated, I don't plan to speak very long, but I just wanted to side with the comments and the general ethos of the statements made by the Honorable Senior Minister Vance Amory. What he said was well said. From where I sit, there's no need to apologize to the Honorable Prime Minister for going off script, because if I know him the way I think I know him, he would have agreed with everything that was said, sir. Okay, it was well established here by several speakers that St. Kitts and Nevis does not have a history or even a long history of having male nurses. And what I will tell you is that based on my recollection, the very first male nurse I recalled at the Jane France General Hospital was a young man by the name of Mr. Eric Francis. Eric Francis would have served in nursing in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And I know that, and I can confirm it, because in my entire almost 52 years on the face of this earth, I have only spent one night in hospital. And the person who took care of me was Mr. Eric Francis. Now, Eric Francis, because of pressure, because of all kinds of sniggering and people wondering what is he doing in nursing, eventually left nursing and entered the police force, and at the same time began building what became a profitable career for him in athletic circles as a coach. He now lives in the United States of America, and that is our loss from nursing. We have also benefited over time from having specialist nurses here in the Federation, some of whom are males. If my memory is correct, some of them would serve, and some of them are still serving, in areas such as the A&E department as well as the ICU. And as I recall this, my mind goes back to one of them who stood out in particular above the rest. And I say rest meaning the rest of the male nurses and the entire female nursing presence. And that person is a Mr. Ron Killo. Matron, you remember Mr. Ron Killo quite well. Mr. Ron Killo, when he left here, was a big loss to us. And I remember you would observe him at the A&E, and the manner in which he dealt with even little children who were scared of hospitals, scared of needles, it was amazing. But at the same time, it was also regrettably an opportunity to see some stereotypes emerging. For example, I would go to JNF, as I would usually do, to do regular walkthroughs, and I would see him there. Other persons who would access the services would comment favorably about Mr. Ron Killo. And then now and again, you would hear things like, my God, even the vomit this man has to sweep up. And that was correct. And regrettably, I happened to have been there one day, and someone had puked on the floor at the A&E. Somebody else passed and told the nurse, aren't you going to clean that up? And she said, no, Mr. Ron Killo can deal with that. Unfortunately, there is the stereotype. Some of the other stereotypes we would have seen are persons, and it was echoed in the remarks by the esteemed guest speaker, is that it seems to convey some sort of effeminate nomenclature or tag to an individual when they say they want to be a nurse. And I think that has created a barrier, a brick wall of sorts, to young men who otherwise would like to have a career of service from entering the profession. So that is an issue that must be overcome. The other issue that must be overcome is, as I indicated earlier in the example of Mr. Ron Killo, some persons regard male nurses as the people you're called to when you need to do the heavy lifting. And that is unfortunate, but of course it offers a help, because at the same time I happen to know, and Matron can agree with this, that we do have a growing number of our nurses, largely because the nursing profession is in short supply based on the ratio of patient to nurses, also because of the issues we have related to non-communicable diseases, related issues out of that having to do with obesity, where some of our nurses are now complaining with issues of disability, backache, and so forth, which are justifiable, and for which the argument could be made, now more than ever, you need to have some muscle to help you to do that, but not for them to come in and be your gophers. They are your equals. So that is the point that we would need to make going there. The other discrepancy that we see emerging is that for some reason there are some of us out there who tend to feel that males do not have the ability to nurture and to care. because we always associate the role of a nurturer to be the role relegated or the privilege of a female. And that couldn't be further from the truth. So we have to look at these particular issues, and especially as it relates to the ongoing crisis we face in the region with non-communicable diseases, we are going to have to top up the nursing infrastructure with more females, yes, but also with more males. At present, we have in St. Kitts a total of 83% of our deaths and disabilities that are due to NCDs. And it is happening to our most productive demographic within the workforce, which tells us we are continuing to have a problem which will reach crisis potential sooner rather than later. So it is a matter that we have to look at even within the broader context of human resources for health. Minister Amory spoke to the issue of indicative areas for study, where everybody wants to go off and do accounting, everybody wants to do business administration, but then they still feel that you should throw money at that, forgetting that there are essential niches that are underserved when it comes to human development and quality of life issues. And I think that it is the imperative of Caribbean heads of government to ensure that you set out what the national priorities are relative to where you want to take your country. Because as our populations age, we will find ourselves looking down the barrel of what already exists in the European Union, where birth rates are low, and also the aging population is such that you might find yourself in a crisis when it comes to taxation, to fuel essentials such as social security, where you want people to delay their retirement and at the same time find funding for the retirement through social security. And at the same time, we also have the privilege in this country where we are having more centenarians now than ever before. Just 2 years ago, we had 19 out of a population of less than 50,000. And that is tremendous on a per capita basis. But who is going to look after them? Because very much the case is the fact that you cannot do like we would have done 40 or 50 years ago and assume that because you had a large family of 10 to 12 children, that is your insurance policy. Because children, this generation of children, want their own lives. They want to do what they want to do. Male children most often think that it is the job of the female siblings to look after their parents because that's not their job. And if this is the case, then what are we going to do? Which then tells me that the elder care industry is a growth sector in the region. And that might explain why tiny St. Kitts and Nevis, as small as we are, already has about 5 such facilities. Because people are more into themselves, into their careers, into the exploration of opportunities beyond the shores of St. Kitts and Nevis, but somebody still has to look after our seniors. Because as Premier said, very soon some of us will be counted among that demographic, and we will need somebody to look after us. So it is something that we have to look at from the standpoint of sustainable human resource development, sustainable human development in general, if we are serious about meeting the targets that we would have signed on to for the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, when I first became aware of this conference, it was specifically on the 25th of April when Senior Minister and I had the privilege to address and declare open the triennial Mothers Union Conference of the Anglican Communion that was held right here in St. Kitts and Nevis, when Dame Dolores Gomes would have approached me with the idea that she was thinking of putting on a conference to attract males into the nursing profession. She stuck with it, and I think it is something that she needs to be commended for. And I also have to say at this juncture that it is a program with which the ministry is honored to participate in. Nurse Gomes is someone who would have had a good career in the United Kingdom, would have come back here into St. Kitts in the late 1970s when I first knew her. Not going to say how long ago that was for me either, but she would have been district nurse in St. Paul's, replacing the retired nurse Cornelia Williams. And then Ms. Cornelia Williams would have replaced my own mommy in nursing. So basically it was a legacy upon which she built, and she would have brought to nursing for the St. Paul's district a caliber of nursing which essentially did much to advance the lot of the people from those communities. And that's the caliber of nursing that we need to see back in the Caribbean. We genuinely need to see that caliber back. Now, some of the prior speakers, including the current president, Mary Liburd, would have broached the subject of some global statistics as it relates to nursing. I myself would have gone to the trouble to look at some of that. And for example, in the USA, you have no more than 9%, where just over 300,000 persons in the nursing profession are considered males, with 41% of those persons filling the roles of nurse anesthetist. Of course, this then puts the ratio for the US somewhere between a long continuum of like 5 to 1 in states like Hawaii, but then 16 to 1 in Midwestern states like Iowa. So it tells you what you're confronting. In the UK, the ratio is more 10 to 1, with 10.21% of the nursing population who are male nurses, or for a better term, who are nurses who happen to be males. Okay, Mr. Allen? Okay. However, that is an improvement from the 1950s, because back then it was a ratio of 1 in 100. So essentially, based on the data that we are seeing, is that a total of 65,755 nurses in the UK happen to be males, which indicates that the stereotypes are gradually shifting. Now, much has been done in terms of the role of the media, and I know the speaker mentioned that media group as one of 3 special interest groups or stakeholders who need to help get the message across that the stereotypes need to be shattered. And one of the things that we are seeing is that the media, through television and the movie industry, would have done a lot more over the last 15 to 20 years in terms of showcasing favorably what happens in a hospital setting. So you might have seen in the UK the program Casualty. You might have seen in the US the ER dramas, as well as Grey's Anatomy. And then you begin to see that there's a changing dynamic in terms of the attitudes towards males in nursing. But then I put it to you that even before these shows, there was one in the 70s called Temperatures Rising, with the old veteran actor Joseph Campanelli. I don't know how many of you remember that. It tells you how old I am. Okay? But these things all contribute to changing that dynamic and that stereotype. Then we move on to Europe in general, where there are 7.3 million nurses according to the WHO, but only 5 to 10% of them are males across the European Union. And then you see a big shift when you come down to Saudi Arabia, where something like 32% of the nurses in Saudi Arabia are females. That is tremendous. But then there's also a hidden reason for it, which I'll come back to. Then in Kenya, you're seeing 24% of the nurses being males, and both in Israel and Italy, 21% each that are nurses. However, the Saudi Arabia story is also tied into the whole social dynamic and traditional roles, the patriarchal system that exists, the fact that women are not regarded as equals, and therefore they do not have the same access to certain jobs. It's only sometime last year some women were allowed to even learn to drive in Saudi Arabia. But it tells us too at the same time that Saudi Arabia is also becoming a net importer of nurses, some from the UK, but most are from the Philippines. And as I said this, my mind goes back to a retired nurse who died a few years ago from St. Kitts. I think she was from Keon, the late mother of Wesley Wharton, who actually worked in Saudi Arabia. So we do have reach from St. Kitts and Nevis nurses all the way into Saudi Arabia. Huh? She's still alive? I thought she had died, pardon me. Okay? I thought that she did. So anyhow, it tells you that wherever quality exists, quality will take you when it comes to nursing. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to point to, and I heard Premier Amory say it, I also heard the speaker say it, in terms of tracing how far back we can go in history where males have rendered service in the roles of nurses. But I take you further than that, because let us look to the Gospels and the parable of the Good Samaritan. He wasn't a woman. Okay? Was he a woman? Of course not. So from where I sit, my first recorded example of a male who was a nurse was the Good Samaritan in the Gospel. Okay? The person who took this man on his own mount, cared for him, salved his wounds, paid for his hotel bill, left him in the care of the hotelier, and then paid a bill in advance in case he overran the spend, and he will pay you the difference when he gets back. Okay? So that tells us that if we have to look to the Bible for the examples of what nursing should be, it should tell us even the Bible did not have a male stereotype when it comes to nursing. So that's how far back I have chosen to go. Now, we also look at nursing in St. Kitts and Nevis and I guess the wider Caribbean as an area that should be viewed as a noble profession, as an issue or an avenue that gives you the opportunity to serve as best you could, especially people who can't help themselves, people who could never pay you back. But then that dynamic is also shifting because the quality of nursing care is beginning to reap benefits also for the person to whom care is rendered. And we see that as a shifting dynamic even here in St. Kitts and Nevis with the level of support that is coming from the private sector. We at present have the privilege in the Ministry of Health and at the institution-based health sector to have an anonymous donor grant on a monthly basis an award of 1,000 EC dollars to 3 nurses who are top performers every single month. This is amazing. And all of it started with the quality of care that foreign national received right here at Jane France General Hospital. And if he did not get that kind of care, it was not going to happen. So it tells us that the potential for partnerships among our stakeholders, even stakeholder groups we don't view as stakeholders, will reap benefits for us later on. What we might want to see later on, for example, Dean Bradshaw, might be a desk at the CFBC, which is funded by a private sector group, a noted private sector group, and that is something that will bring extra benefit and profile and funding to the nursing profession. And these are the kinds of things that we would want to see. We see it happening in some African countries. We see it, for example, even in the diamond industry, in countries like Botswana and so forth, where well-known international brands such as Unilever and so forth sponsor desks at university geared towards health and the sciences. And they name it after notable persons like Kwame Nkrumah and so forth. And why can't we have that in the Caribbean? When we have so many companies in the Caribbean who have stood the test of time as indigenous Caribbean companies throughout, made a name for themselves, your Grace Kennedys, your Neil and Masseys, and so forth. And even us here in St. Kitts and Nevis, where we happen to have the highest number of publicly registered or traded companies within the OECS. There are perhaps maybe about 25 publicly traded companies. 11 of them are registered right here. So there are opportunities for leverage and for more partnership that I think we should be looking towards so that we don't have to consume ourselves with the funding of the profession, but the upgrading and the enhancement of the profession. Now, one of the points that I wanted to raise in closing has to do with the recruitment of overseas staff. And I noticed Nurse Diaz pointed to the fact that her 2 male nurses are of foreign extraction. Right. Sometimes you don't have a choice. If we had a choice, we would prefer to have all of our specialist nurses from right within the jurisdiction. But as Premier Amri indicated, if persons do not know where the opportunities exist, if the attitudes are cemented in their minds that nursing careers are for certain people, then nothing is going to change. At present, we have something like at least maybe 23 nurses in St. Kitts who are of foreign extraction, but they are specialist nurses, meaning they have gone beyond just a Bachelor of Nursing, and they are nurses in the ICU, nurses in maternity, the neonatal unit. So that is the next step that we want our local nurses to go to, because foreign recruitment comes with extra costs. The rules of the civil service are clear, that if you recruit a foreign nurse, you have the extra cost of housing, round-trip airfare, and everything else. But at the same time, while we have the benefit of these foreign nurses here in the Federation, we should make good use of them as good examples that we can emulate. It is not an area of threat. It is not about comparing salaries and wondering how come he could come here and his salary is bigger, her salary is bigger. That's the bar we need to rise to. And that's where the opportunity exists. So I commend this workshop as something that is timely, a forum whose time has come, a forum which I hope will not be the first and only, but the first of many, and a forum that will bring forth a springboard of ideas, suggestions, recommendations that can be taken forward, not just to the policymakers, but also to the persons in leadership in government, the persons who are the actual practitioners in the field, because we need to hear from you too in terms of how your working conditions can be better, how your opportunities for advancement can be enhanced. And as such, the Ministry of Health, as I indicated earlier, is quite honored to partner with you in this worthwhile endeavor. And having said all of that, it is my pleasure to declare the workshop or the conference officially open.